Welcome, everybody, to Risky Business 2, Insurance for Nonprofits and Small Transit Agencies. National RTAP Executive Director, Robin Phillips, will kick off the meeting. Robin?
Super. Thanks so much, Kara. I'm really happy to be here and really glad that we're able to do this next piece of our insurance discussion. Private nonprofits play a significant role in the transit environment, particularly in rural areas, but many CAPs and senior centers have picked up the need for and have stepped up to create mobility and build mobility in rural and tribal areas. And it's important that these smaller agencies that aren't protected through municipal insurance or state insurance have access to reasonably priced, good coverage so that they're able to concentrate and focus on providing service in their communities. Now I'm going to hand it over to one of our co-sponsors, Dawn Chartok.
Before that, let's do a little housekeeping. Thank you so much, Robin. This webinar is co-hosted by National RTAP, AASHTO, MTAP, and NADTC. So let's just talk about the webinar. Most of you are very familiar with webinars, but you can ask questions or share comments in the chat throughout the webinar. And after all the panelists have presented, we'll do the questions and answers. So they'll just remain in the chat. You'll be muted during the presentation. And when we're up to the questions and answers, you may raise your hand and then you'll be called upon to unmute yourself to ask a question or share a comment. The slides and the recording of this presentation will be posted on the National RTAP webinars page, and you'll receive a brief survey tomorrow to tell us your feedback about this webinar and help us to improve our future webinars. So this is what you normally see in Zoom. You can show or not show your video. So please stay muted. And there's the chat box, and the raise hand is in the reactions. We have a great team of speakers today. You heard from Robin, and like Robin said, you'll hear from Dawn Chartok. I'll be introducing people as we go along, and then our expert panel after we hear about the TA centers. So first, I'll tell you a little bit about National RTAP. We're a technical assistance center funded by Federal Transit Administration, FTA, through the Section 5311 Rural Funding Program. We provide free training and materials and technical assistance to rural and tribal transit providers and to state RTAPs. This webinar is one example. We're governed by a review board, which is composed of state DOT and rural and tribal transit agency managers from across the country. You can learn more at our website, nationalrtap.org. National RTAP is also the leader of the TACL, Transportation Technical Assistance Coordination Library, which provides a sustainable methodology and platform for information on rural and tribal transit coordination. This library contains information from FTA and all of its technical assistance centers. You can find TACL at transportation-tackle.org. So now I'm going to introduce Dawn. Dawn Chartok is chair of the AASHTO MTAP Steering Committee. He is Deputy Director of the Public Transportation Division at the Washington State Department of Transportation. Dawn is a 20-year veteran of WSDOT, and he oversees a $400 million grant program. He oversees light rail safety, community partnerships, budget and capital procurement at the agency, and much more. He holds a Bachelor of Arts from American University and a Juris Doctorate from the Seattle University School of Law. Now, Dawn is going to talk about the AASHTO MTAP.
Hey, great. Thank you very much. MTAP stands for the Multi-State Technical Assistance Program, and it's part of the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. It's essentially the state transit offices from the DOTs across the country, and it's a great peer-to-peer group. And the thing we deal largely with are the issues that are important to the people on the line today. Because we're tasked by FTA and very often our state governments with supporting the rural, the tribal, and the nonprofits. And the vast majority of the work we goes to supporting those folks. We do a lot of learning and brainstorming on how to make those providers more successful. And that's one of the reasons that I'm happy we're supporting this training here today. I won't go through this slide, and so you can kind of see some of the things that we do there. And Kara, can we go on to the next one? And these are just some of our recent activities. Hey, did you ever wonder, it's like, oh, how does my state compare to other states for their investments in public transportation? AASHTO has this great publication that they do every year about, how all the different states fund their different groups. And we also recently met for our winter meeting, again, to brainstorm a lot of those ideas about, hey, what's coming next? So for example, a lot more money coming our way for rural construction projects that hasn't been there before. And it's like, how do we support folks in more rural areas to do that work? Those are just some examples of the types of things that we've been working on. And again, I'm really happy to be here today. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Don. And at the end of this presentation, you'll see contact information for all the centers that are sponsoring this webinar. Our next presenter is Jeremy Johnson Miller. He is with the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center, NADTC. He's the Communications Manager, and NADTC is a federally recognized technical assistance center funded by the FTA. You saw them on the tackle slide. They're focused on ADA accessibility for older adults and people with disabilities across the country. Jeremy coordinates the release of publications and reports from NADTC. Prior to joining them, Jeremy provided guidance and compliance oversight of state and federally funded transit programs at Iowa DOT, also overseeing outreach and collaboration with communities and other state departments throughout the state. Jeremy will also be the moderator for the Q&A section of this webinar. So Jeremy.
Hi, thank you. Again, my name is Jeremy Johnson Miller, and I am with NADTC. And we are a unique partnership between Easter Seals and US Aging. So we do have a cooperative agreement between the three agencies, including FTA. And our mission is really to promote the availability of accessible transportation options, specifically serving the needs of older adults, people with disabilities, caregivers, and their communities. We do a lot of similar work as National RTAP. We primarily do a lot of technical assistance and informational sharing sessions, or through our 800 number and email. Anybody can contact us for any information or questions. We do offer webinars and training or educational sessions as well. We do have a big piece in partnership and coordination, not necessarily just with the other TA centers as highlighted, but any other community organizations that have questions or anything that we can assist them with. We're happy to help and partner on different initiatives. And lastly, too, we do have annual community grants that we do provide to various different communities or organizations to either get their programs off the ground or into implementation phase. So please visit our website for more information. I can put that in the chat for everybody to access. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jeremy. And now we're going to move on to the panel presentations. Our first panelist will be Sarah McDonnell. She is the Director and Program Manager of the Nonprofit Insurance Program, known as NPIP, which is an insurance cooperative for nonprofits, risks focused on property and casualty insurance coverages. Since 2009, Sarah has worked in various roles within NPIP, and today, as the Director of NPIP, she works closely with the Board of Directors on administration, program operations, risk management, insurance placement, and member services. In 2015, she worked to change state legislation for NPIP to operate as it does today. She has her P&C license in various states and has earned her Certified Program Leaders designation. So ready for you, Sarah. Welcome.
Great, thank you so much. And welcome everybody. We're looking forward to speaking with you today. A couple of things we'll cover today this is kind of an outline of what we're planning to cover, I suppose. Tips for insuring your assets. I realize all of you are transit organizations and have some, priorities focused on transit transportation, but this is going to go over that plus a little bit more to consider as you're looking at insurance options. Also, loss control recommendations and why they matter when you're looking at insurance coverage, how to communicate those to carriers and to your brokers. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll go into alternative types of insurance and different types of alternate structures. Just a high level, kind of some ideas of ways to get creative as the insurance market continues to change so that you do feel like you have some options out there. And then we'll end with talking about MPIP as an insurance pool. What is pooling and how does it work? There are other types of pools, and we'll go into how we formed and what worked for us and why it's so effective. I do want to make a disclaimer. I'm not an attorney. I do work in the insurance industry. I am a licensed broker, but I don't operate as a retail broker. And so that does change perspective a little bit. But everything I'm saying here isn't intended to be legal advice. And there'll be some things that you ask that question to yourself. Always happy to help with recommendations, but they are just risk management recommendations and insurance recommendations. So with that, let's get into some of the content. We're just going to provide you some tips and things to consider as you're talking about insuring your assets. Number one thing I always recommend is to utilize the help of a broker or an agent. I know budget is tight and it's always something you consider when you're talking about costs for insurance. But here are some things insurance brokers and agents can do for you and why I so strongly recommend them. This graphic shows, the overview of what those things are, and I'll just talk about a few of them. They can work with insurance carriers, many different insurance carriers in most cases, to bring you some options. You always want to work with somebody you really trust, that you really feel like you can say, this is everything I'm doing. Here's all my cards are on the table. Please help me be sure I'm protected as an organization. So they can then take that information and go to the insurance market for you and find options, find carriers that can bring back options for you based on your need. And you don't want to buy too much insurance, so they can make recommendations along those lines. They complete documents for you. They can review quotes and help you understand when you're looking side by side. They can help you understand what is actually the same coverage, what is different, but maybe worded very differently. They can recommend based on what you're doing, where it makes sense to take higher deductibles, maybe less limits, so you're not purchasing more than you really need or taking on more risk than you really should be or than you're comfortable with. They can help you with staying in touch with the state of the market. What makes sense when it comes to increases? What makes sense when it comes to changes for adding operations, those sort of things. And then of course they maintain schedules and things like that as you report in new vehicles or change in vehicles, that sort of thing. Most importantly, I think one of the things that most nonprofits that I work with find advantageous is really working through coverage forms and helping you understand what the coverage is saying, what it does and doesn't cover, what it excludes, those sort of things. They'll work on processing renewal stuff and the documents you need for certificates as you're doing different things with your lenders, or all kinds of reasons that people need certificates, but it helps with that. But also if you get a new vehicle or change locations, those sort of things, they'll process all of that and be sure you're covered adequately for your risk. Many of you work in the space of having contracts. Probably every one of you on this call has some sort of contract in place. They can help you be sure you meet those requirements. in the contract or negotiate things for you so that you're not paying for more than you need in that contract as far as insurance requirements go. And then, of course, everybody has claims, especially in transportation, helping you understand those coverage determinations and figuring out next steps to really maximize your benefit of what you've already purchased. Thank you. So when you're working on coverage options, I always really strongly recommend that you be as upfront as possible with an agent or your broker to really be sure they understand what you're trying to cover. A mistake sometimes people make is they don't want the insurance company to know everything they're doing, because sometimes that's risky, right? They might charge you more, but your broker is really there to be sure that whatever you are doing, it protects your organization. The insurance they're placing will transfer that risk over to an insurance company and you don't have to worry about it anymore. And they'll help you with cost and budget too. So part of that conversation should be really selling what you are doing. Most of you who are doing these activities, as far as different types of transportation and different types of people that you're transporting, you have best practices in place and you have effective risk management programs. Really sell those things. It's a great opportunity to brag a little about what you're doing and get some advantage from those insurance companies as far as rate reduction or even best practices, just making sure that you're on the same page with those carriers. And then making sure you're completing all the information and providing plenty of time to go through the process for underwriting and to give yourself time to really consider things. It really helps with overall pricing and understanding of the product. And then, be open to alternatives. As you get quotations back, you're probably not going to like all the terms in most cases, especially in a difficult market. So offer some suggestions. Are there, things that they're doing that the insurance company doesn't like as much? Maybe they'll budge a little bit if you offer to take a much higher deductible, or even if you just say, give me some recommendations for risk management, I'll implement those things. Sometimes it helps insurance carriers be a lot more comfortable with what it is that you're doing. Show you're willing to work with them, and it usually results in a win-win. I'm not going to go through every detail here. I know there's a lot of stuff on a slide. But these are the main types of coverages, with the exception of that last one on contracts, which I'll talk about in just a second. But these are the primary types of coverages that nonprofits need in order to insure their assets. I made a couple of notes in here just to kind of talk about what is included in each of those. And I'm absolutely happy to stay on afterward and take any questions that might come up on other lines. But I thought for this today, we would just focus a little bit on on auto. So a couple of things just to note here. Typically, your auto coverage would include your staff and your volunteers using vehicles. We'll talk a little bit more about volunteers, kind of a different category when William talks later today. But auto liability is a must. All of you know this. You all work in transportation. Many states have requirements for those, limits and what you have to have in place, but it'll pay to protect your organization if there's injuries or damage that your driver causes to other people or property carrying out their duties on behalf of your organization. And then, of course, depending on which state you're in, uninsured or underinsured motorists is always beneficial. This covers you and the passengers for bodily and personal injuries, damages, death caused by an at-fault uninsured person or underinsured person. If you don't have any owned autos, it's really beneficial to have a non-owned auto liability policy. There are some, nuances to what the personal insurance will pay for of the person who owns the vehicle. So those are questions to ask, and always be sure you're asking that information of anybody driving their personal vehicles. It can really help protect your organization from loss overall. And then the last one I just wanted to comment on specifically was contracts. Many contracts have requirements, regardless of what your organization does, for additional insureds or specific limits and coverages, sometimes even dictate deductibles. These are all things that you can talk about with a carrier and make sure that, when your broker's negotiating these things, or if you're doing it directly without a broker, these are areas that you really hone in on to be sure that you're protecting your organization. Ask for additional insured status where you can. In your contracts, be sure that you're not taking on all liability. As much as you can, you want to try and limit how much you take on. So how do you even evaluate your insurance need? It can be difficult. It's a big insurance world out there, and you don't want to pay for more than what you really need. So just ask yourself questions like, do you have professionals on your staff? meaning things like, social workers, nurses, counselors, therapists, things like that. As depending on what you do in your operation, and I know most of you are, well, everybody here is in transit, there's still some exposure there. So as you're going through and trying to decide what makes sense for you, really ask yourself those questions. Do I need coverage for these sort of things? Brokers can help you with that, or you can ask for professional liability coverage. Events are a little bit different because there's so many different components, and nonprofits are so creative. Really, public entities, everybody's really creative with events. It's how you fundraise, how you make, get engagement in your communities, those sort of things. So really just figure out, especially in the transportation space, who's using your vehicles? Are those people that you've approved? Have you checked their MVRs? If they're using their own vehicles, have you checked the proof of insurance? Have you done that recently? Do you have good plans in place for that sort of thing? There's a couple of others listed here. Volunteer accident, that's William will talk a little bit later about volunteer coverage specific to auto risk. And then excess insurance is kind of, think of it like an umbrella, really goes over. So if you have a small amount of coverage in place, maybe you're doing something specific, or you just overall feel more comfortable having something cover all types of coverages, it gets you a little bit more limit when something happens, but you don't necessarily have to buy it for every single coverage line. And then as we see in the news, there's more things happening with violent events. There are coverages out there for that. Depending on what you do in your business, it may or may not make sense for you. But there are coverages like that to consider. So I'll dive in real quick here on loss prevention tips specific to type of coverage. Again, I won't read all of this, but there are some things in here that you might find beneficial. And I mentioned a few. For auto in particular, you're talking about driver screening and MVR checks. Every time you have turnover, if you have more or less skill level, making sure you're training to an adequate, an acceptable level, something that you'd really like to see. If there is an accident, have an accident review program, debrief with that driver, what happened, what's changed, make sure that every single time you're talking about those things to learn from them and to teach other staff. Make sure you have meetings. Meetings really help people stay connected to the goal of and the philosophy of risk management. That enterprise risk management attitude does matter. People understanding that their actions do impact others helps. But incentives for good driving, good performance, sharing information, results, experiences, those things have really proven to help. Ongoing training, that sort of stuff we've talked about. And then again, just requiring proof of insurance, making sure people are licensed. Don't be afraid to ask those questions, even though sometimes it feels a little awkward when people are helping you, or even if they work for you. Sometimes those are things that you just kind of assume. Make sure you're asking those questions and putting policies in place and making sure people understand the importance of that to protect what they're helping build too. Then I'll jump down to the contracts piece, making sure you're having indemnification language in your contract with hold harmless for your organization. Whoever's doing things as part of your contract, you want them to take on liability for the things that they're doing. That's okay, that's normal. Again, just something to talk about, a discussion point as you're working through contract negotiations. Really pay attention to limits. You don't want to say, yep, I'll do whatever you need me to do. You want to really think about, what do I want to be on the hook for here? Most of the time, people are willing to negotiate limits with you so that you can make sure the cost stays reasonable. And then require proof of coverage, just like you would from your drivers. You want to be sure that whoever's helping you, contracting with you, whatever service they're doing for you, you're getting that proof of coverage from them to protect your organization. Set reminders a year later, make sure you're getting new information from them to be sure that that coverage is being renewed. That's an important piece of that contract. These are kind of on a group-wide basis. So if you manage large fleets of autos, these are some things we'd recommend. Have some very generalized policy and procedural things in place, but make sure you're evaluating them often. So evaluations of the vehicles, but also of your drivers. You want to be sure that everything that you're doing is kind of group-wide when you're talking about larger fleets or larger groups of drivers even. Sensors, consider that. The industry more and more is requesting people do sensors, especially if you have fleets. So what does that cost? And work with a carrier. Sometimes they'll give you credits if you can show, hey, this is my sensor data. Look how good we've done, and really showcase that. But also they helps you when you have sensor information to make training recommendations. These are areas we're deficient in our training, or we need better policies or procedures, or we just need to better infuse that culture thought process of risk management. We've talked a little bit about safety reviews. But be sure those high risk areas, if you're driving in, very densely populated areas, a lot of times it helps to have kind of an additional review process if something were to happen, or incidents, or even best practices in place for those types of areas. And then facilities are kind of more property focused, but really making sure that where you're storing your vehicles, you're really looking at best practices there as far as maintenance and grounds operations, making sure people have delegated responsibility for those sort of things. So here's a couple of ideas of alternative insurance models, alternate coverage models, I guess we're calling them. Their alternative risk is really how we think about them. So in insurance, the whole idea is you transfer your risk to somebody else for a premium. There are many ways to get insurance coverage. So there's standard traditional insurance, like you'd personally buy in most cases. And then there's other types of things. There's mutual insurance companies, there's risk funds, there's risk trusts, there's these risk retention groups. What these really captives, these are all different ideas. What these really all are is kind of a different structure to transfer that risk over. So in some cases, the mass or the kind of initial startup amount you have to have a group of people come together with a large amount of either number by member or premium volume, something like that, to get a carrier interested in saying, you know what, this is a risk I'm willing to take on. Types of operations, nonprofits, for-profits, that might determine what you can do, what types of alternative risk structures work best for you. Some states have specific rules. Washington permits risk pooling. So you'll notice MPIP is a risk pool. Madelyn will talk about us in a few minutes here. But there are others that don't permit pooling. So there are other things that you can do in those states that maybe are more permitted on kind of a co-op type model or a sharing model. Risk retention groups is a great example. It's actually a federal type thing where everybody comes together very similarly to a pool, but it's on a federal level and it has some specific parameters. Diversity in your group helps with rate overall. So making sure that you don't end up with too much really helps. So today we're going to talk a little bit about pooling. Madelyn and I both work with MPIP, formed as a risk pool in Washington State, and Madelyn is a board member for the nonprofit insurance program. So with that, I'll hand it over to her.
I'll introduce Madelyn now. Thank you very much, Sarah. Madelyn Carlson is the CEO of People for People. She has 35 years experience in nonprofit administration, financial oversight, contract compliance, and community engagement. For the past 16 years as People for People CEO, Madelyn has been a strong advocate for partnerships to increase community resources for strong and healthy communities. She represents public transportation on Yakima Valley Conference of Governments, MPO, RTPO Policy Board, and serves on the board of directors for NPIP and the Greater Columbia Accountable Community of Health to represent and promote rural and Eastern Washington's complex needs. Okay, ready for you, Matt.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And so People for People, we have been a member of the nonprofit insurance program from its inception. It was in 2003 that the nonprofit transportation providers experience really increased insurance rates that impacted our ability to continue providing the same level of service for our communities. Working with CTA Northwest, Washington State transportation providers were successful in securing legislation that authorized nonprofits to form an insurance pool. The pool really has a mission. It was established by and for nonprofits to provide risk management solutions and stable, affordable insurance. The pool structure is that NPIP is overseen by an elected board of directors. The board of directors is responsible to hire and oversee the third-party administrator, which is currently Clear Risk Solutions. And they manage all of the underwriting, the risk management, they handle all the claims and administration and accounting for the pool. NPIP, currently, we have almost 900 members. The members work directly with their insurance agent to become a member and to be able to maintain that coverage. And so NPIP truly is unique. NPIP has a strong network of knowledgeable insurance agents. They truly understand and can represent NPIP services. With the size of NPIP membership, NPIP is able to negotiate and make sure that we get an affordable coverage that is unique to nonprofits and also is providing the coverage that nonprofits truly need. The pool is protected with an aggregate stop loss policy, and most important, provides valuable risk management tools for large as well as a very small nonprofit. So risk management is important to maintain our affordable insurance rates. Since we are in this together as a pool, NPIP focuses on education and training to reduce losses. Members have access to the pre-litigation program that has experts and personnel issues available to review a situation. Having their objective review is so beneficial. And then they can follow up with education, training, and guidance on how to navigate a potential risk and to minimize liability. Members have access to best practices, group trainings, online trainings, and individualized one-on-one trainings. Topics from HR, cybersecurity, and safety are available and can be customized for the individual members' needs. Members are supported to reduce losses, and that ensures the overall health of the pool. And then another great risk management tool is for transportation providers as well as nonprofits that have employees that are driving on their behalf. MPIP has a driver training simulator, and this can be brought on site to the member, and the drivers are able to have that experience of practicing and improving their skills, how to avoid an accident, and also to practice driving in adverse weather conditions.
Thank you, Madelyn. And the last slide was both Madelyn and Sarah's contact information. As stated, this presentation will be uploaded to the National RTAP website following today's session. So everybody will be able to contact our panelists if they would like to. Our next presenter will be William Henry, who is the Vice President of Volunteers Insurance Service Association, which provides insurance and risk management services for volunteer-based organizations nationwide. William has presented webinars and on-site workshops on managing the risks associated with volunteer engagement for more than 40 nonprofit organizations and conferences nationwide. He also creates content for VIS's email publication, First Light Facts, which is www.firstlightfacts.com. Thank you, William. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be with everybody. VIS does two things. We provide insurance specifically for volunteers, including volunteer drivers, and we also have an array of risk management resources, much akin to what Sarah described a few moments ago. And so I'll give you some highlights of some of those that might be most pertinent for your own operations. As far as risk management is concerned, and let's talk about that first, we think that the communication on the front end of any sort of client relationship is so crucial that we put a lot of emphasis on it. If your agency wants to provide transportation services or has been asked to provide them for an individual client, what is it that they expect? And what are you promising to do? What does the client need? Where are they going? How often do they need to go there? Do they need assistance getting into the vehicle or through the door? Do they need for the volunteer to be able to, for example, at a doctor visit, to take notes? Do they need a wheelchair, a walker? Is someone going to ride along with them on their trips, wherever they might be going? You might have certain assumptions about what they need, but you need to make certain that everyone's expectations are aligned so that there are no surprises, no disappointments. When the volunteer driver shows up the first time, what's the first impression that he or she is making? You know, when you take an Uber or you get the Safe Light windshield repair people to come to your house, they'll send you a picture of what the car looks like or what the person looks like, so that you have a comfort level that's established. If your volunteer has an identification that you provided, have them show that when they meet the person and introduce themselves, make certain that they understand what the destination is, the client understands, these kinds of things. We often take for granted, but communication is such an important component of risk management that it certainly needs attention on the front end. So this slide says, where are we? What's next? This has to do with what is the destination? Is the driver going to remain there, or is someone else going to show up for the return trip? All these boxes need to be checked so that the client is completely comfortable, and perhaps a caregiver for the client is completely comfortable with what's going on. Be friendly, have conversation, stay away from any discussion of health issues. We have a couple of resources I'm going to talk about, particularly the first one I'll talk about a little bit more. We have an online volunteer driver safety course that we developed in conjunction with the National Volunteer Transportation Center. There's a link to it that you can go to at your leisure. It's housed at the Community Transportation Association of America. A volunteer driver can register, there's no cost, can register for this course, go through it in about an hour. There are sections, and after each section, there are multiple choice questions just to check the participant's knowledge. They have to answer those questions before they can go on to the next component. When they get through the course, there's a certificate of completion can be generated. A lot of our participating organizations have made this a standard so that they can tell their supporters, their clients, all of our drivers have been through this online volunteer driver safety course. Sorry, I lost the screen. I lost the screen for a second. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we can still see it.
I think I'm,
Assisted rides.
yes, I'm on the screen that says, what can RTAP do for you? Can you get me back to the slides some way?
You don't see the screen, but others do.
I don't think so, because I'm seeing the RTAP website.
If you have your own PowerPoint, you can look at that. You're up to the resources page that talks about the professional volunteer driver and assisted rides.
All right. Well,
It's got to be something
Yeah,
on your,
I can open it. I can open it now in my directory. Sorry about that. It's opening. Okay, let me catch up with where we were. All right. Assisted Rides is one of the Viz partners. They offer a web-based platform, very flexible for volunteers to schedule themselves for trips, track volunteer assignments, not only for transportation, but also for other volunteer activities. I recommend them. All right, a key component in risk management is finding out who's going to be behind the wheel and what their background is, what their qualifications are. These four are fundamentals: the proof of insurance, make them show you the certificate of insurance that they have, and when does it renew? Put that date on your calendar so that you can follow up and make sure that their insurance is continuous. Motor vehicle record. One of the resources that we offer is an objective way to analyze that motor vehicle record. They might have a minor infraction that does not disqualify them, but other infractions would. And that is one of the resources that we provide our members. If your state requires a vehicle inspection annually, put it on your calendar also to have them show you that they passed the inspection. There may be other tests and screens. If you have vulnerable clients, you might want to do a criminal background check, for example, with each driver. Risk management is all about putting all the appropriate components together. It's not one thing, it's many things to help you minimize risk and reduce that exposure. Here are some resources that we recommend. Our partner, Sterling Volunteers, has a very scalable program for screening volunteers' backgrounds. Our members get a discount on that. And I mentioned the acceptability checklist. That's the way to objectively evaluate a volunteer's acceptability to drive for you. That's in what we call our Viz Vault that's available to members. You know, a lot of volunteers are in the same age cohort as the older people that they're driving, when in a case of older people being your clients. Sometimes their skills will diminish physically, cognitively. It's something that needs to be watched. If you can ride along with them occasionally, just make that routine so they don't feel like they're singled out. If you suspect that there's an issue that impairs a driver's ability to transport someone safely, have back to communication, talk with their family, see what they've observed, see what suggestions they might have. But there may be a point at which the volunteer needs to be redirected, if you will, within the organization. Perhaps someone who's been a longtime volunteer would be an excellent ambassador for your organization, or help with planning events, those kinds of things. And these are some of the resources you might consider. Click on these links at your leisure, and you'll find some resources that might be useful to you. The Occupational Therapy Association can provide a third-party evaluation of someone's physical and mental ability to drive safely. This is getting into the meat of the online training course that I mentioned. These are some of the things that the volunteer needs to be aware of, needs to be oriented to, and needs to be held accountable for. The safety of the vehicle and the passengers' comfort and safety. Defensive driving. We've heard it so many times we might tune it out, but it is the heart and soul of risk management in a volunteer-based transportation program. Being aware of hazards that can occur, what to do if an accident does occur. In addition to that online course, our members have access to a variety of what we call preventer papers. These are 2-page documents. They're great to give one-on-one to volunteers, or you can have small group training if that's practical for your organization. It covers virtually everything that sometimes goes wrong, either in a vehicle or typical volunteer activities outside of a vehicle. Preventer papers. Okay, based on the claims experience of our volunteer insurance program, these are some of the most common kinds of accidents. Left turns at intersections, particularly in inclement weather. These are a very frequent cause of accidents, and we have seen some fatalities, unfortunately, caused by this sort of accidents. In things that happen at intersections, turning from the wrong lane, that often happens. Going through stop signs, these kinds of things. Accidents don't always happen on the road. We've seen a number of accidents in parking lots. Unfortunately, a volunteer backed over the client who was standing behind her car once, and that client did not survive. If you think about how that might have been prevented, the answer is a great demonstration of how simple risk management can be. If there were a rule that the car has to be in park until the client is safely buckled in and ready to go, that fatality would have been prevented. All right, what does drivers sometimes do that cause accidents? They're right here, the main causes: speeding, failing to yield right of way, turning without proper signals, driving left of the center lane. And here are some others. In our course, we talk a lot about passing, following too closely. What's the 3-second rule? If you, the vehicle in front of you, watch when they pass a stationary object and then count slowly to 3. You shouldn't be passing that object yourself before you get to 3. That's a good rule of thumb for safe following distance. Distracted driving, texting, eating, those kinds of things often cause accidents. Improper backing. There are a lot more things that can go wrong when you back into an aisle in a parking lot than when you back into the parking space. So we always encourage drivers to back in rather than pull in frontways. Just because volunteers are unpaid, that doesn't mean that they can't be held accountable and shouldn't be held accountable. The fewer distinctions you can make between volunteers and your paid staff, the better from a risk management standpoint. They're all human resources. Sometimes if volunteers continue not to follow your rules, you just might have to fire them. Tell them their light can shine a little better somewhere else. Because what's important for the organization and what's best for it is the most important consideration, not any individual volunteer. I usually get the question about having volunteers sign a waiver of liability. You can do that. The most important benefit is that it focuses the volunteer's attention on things that could go wrong, but don't depend on it as a shield for liability. The judges have tossed many a volunteer waiver out when they said that it was skewed in favor of the organization. All right, moving from risk management to the insurance coverage. Sarah talked about this, and I'm not going to go over that again, but my point is that volunteers need to be insured separately from the organization. Why is that? Well, your organization buys policies to cover the entity itself. The general liability policy is one cornerstone. If you include volunteers on your general liability policy, you are sharing with them the limits that you have selected for that policy. Typically a $1 million per occurrence, $1 million aggregate policy. If a volunteer causes an accident or an injury and both the volunteer and your organization are sued, you are in a position of potentially having an underinsured claim. The insurance company doesn't care how the money is divided up. They just know that $1 million is all they're going to pay. So if the judgment or settlement is $1.5 million, for example, where will you come up with that additional $500,000? This is why volunteers need to be taken off of the general liability policy. There's an easy way to do that, and insure them separately. That's our advice. There's a link there to the SEMA companies, which is the business administrator for the Volunteers Insurance Service Program. They are a property and casualty broker and have been working with VIS since we were formed in 1972. So if you go there, you can find your way to much more detailed information about the coverage and an online application. And I'm happy to respond to any questions either now or later to fill in any areas of interest that you have. Thanks very much.
Thank you, William. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we have all the panelists up. And I saw there were a batch of questions in the chat and some hands raised. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy, who will moderate the panelist discussion. And all of our panelists and our webinar sponsors, if need be, will be available to answer audience.
I will first go to the hand that's been raised. Brad Lindsay, I don't know if you still have a question for the group. All right, Brad, let us know if you're still there and have a question. We can get back to you. There was just the one question that I saw in the chat and Sarah took care of that. So thank you. Kara, did you have any other questions that came through that maybe I didn't see?
I didn't see any others in the chat. I see Sarah answered a question.
Yes. Okay.
But maybe some of our panelists have questions for some of the other panelists while our audience is thinking of things they might want to ask.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anything. So I do have a few questions on hold, but if the panelists have other questions, please ask them now.
So this is Don from AASHTO. As part of Sarah's presentation, she mentioned that you should really check with your own state law when considering different alternative coverage models. I'm curious if that also applies to grant funding. You know, we all have funders of different sorts, both state and federal. And does that drive at all the choices that you make for insurance coverage?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And we do get some questions from our members as far as having to provide certain things to either funders or even lenders in certain circumstances. I don't know a ton about the grant world just because it's not my space, but I would say I would expect it to. Really all it means is what are they looking for? A lot of times they're just looking to be sure they're protected and that your organization is protected. So it's really a communications issue. How do you communicate the way, even in a pool, you have some shared limits. So how do you communicate a shared limit to them? And a lot of times what I do is I show performance and financial security. So we are regulated by the state of Washington, and it's easy to show, you know, our audits and things like that. But further, I kind of show our claims performance in many cases too, just to show how far we are from some of those group aggregate limits. It makes people a lot more comfortable, and funders and lenders both usually are pretty satisfied when I give them information like that. It's a great question. We do get that quite a lot. So, yeah.
Sarah, we have our own strange insurance vocabulary, and some of the participants might not be familiar with it, you might want to explain what a stop loss concept is and how
Sure.
the excess insurance policies come into play when that's exceeded.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm terrible about using acronyms, and insurance is so known for them, right? They're terrible. So yes, stop loss is a way to protect a pool. So MPIP utilizes a stop loss, and what that really means is it's a policy that we buy as a group to say this is the most amount of risk we're willing to take on in a given year. So we fund a certain level, and once we get to that number, we say this is as much as we're willing to do, and we have an insurance carrier provide the rest. So it's very much like the policies that you purchase. You say, this is my deductible, this is what I'm comfortable doing, and anything above this, I want you to take on. But the difference with the stop loss is it's every time there's a claim, it says this is how much on the claim side I'm willing to take on too. So you've got an element of risk and you've got an element of payment, and it really shows the amount that you're willing to pay. And it's a great way to protect any sort of group structure, so to be sure that you're really not taking on more than you anticipated in any given claims year.
Okay, we did hear back from the hand that was raised earlier. They were having an issue with the mic, and they are interested in more information on the driver simulator that was briefly mentioned. We have our own simulator that are in the process of being updated. Any comments or thoughts on that?
That's great.
And yeah, and Sarah, I don't know if you know all the technology that's available from the driver simulator. As a user of it, we have found it very beneficial because it creates that simulation and helps the driver to drive defensively and really to experience, what they should do if they hit an icy spot, that type of thing. And as far as any of the particulars on that, Sarah, I don't know if you can provide anything other than that.
Yeah, I don't know offhand vendors and things like that. We update every couple of years. We go in and either do a new module. We've even, I think a year and a half, 2 years ago, just as COVID was kind of clearing up and people were getting back to it, we replaced, with a whole new module. It really was a reset. But Brad, I'm happy to share some of that information. I just don't know it offhand. So shoot me over an email, or I can give you a call as soon as I can get that from our teammates who handle that more directly. Yeah, it's great that you're doing that though. That really helps a lot. It's a great driver training tool.
There is just a few minutes left. We did have one more question. What is the best type of insurance for sharing transit vehicles?
I don't know if this is necessarily directed at me. I think maybe just on the element of risk sharing. Is that kind of what you guys are thinking? Or Kathy, if you have any comments on this more directly.
Is this really asking if there are vehicles that are being shared between a group of nonprofits, across contracts, perhaps? And I know that People for People, we are looking at providing some additional transportation service where we would be utilizing, our drivers would be driving other people's vehicles. And that is something that we work with our carrier on to make sure that we are completely covered and their vehicle is being covered as well. So it's working with owners of the vehicle plus our drivers and the insurance carriers to make sure that, again, we're not over covering or overpaying for the same service, but that each entity is protected.
Yeah, I would recommend, if you're sharing vehicles, or like Madelyn's describing, you're sharing kind of drivers of vehicles. Maybe that's kind of a way that I would think about it. Ask the same questions. Are these insured? How much are they insured for? Are you right when their drivers are coming to use your vehicles? If they're yours, don't be shy to say, I want their MVRs. I want to be sure you have these processes in place. I want to see their personal limits, assuming they're, if they're using their own vehicles. But yeah, treat them just as aggressively as you would yours. You can even ask for training modules or say you're not comfortable with certain things if you would prefer specific trainings before people are utilizing the vehicles that you own, because you would be responsible for that.
Thank you so much for answering questions, and to all our panelists and to the hosts of this webinar, National RTAP, AASHTO, MTAP, NADTC. You'll have information on how to reach all of the resources when we post this webinar presentation and recording. And please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any additional question. Robin, do you want to say a final word at the end of this? No? Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I just, it's been really interesting. Every time I hear more about these programs, I'm interested in how this works. One of the things that didn't come up, and I should have asked about it, was can people from other states, how would they potentially connect with this NPIP? Because it's my impression that you are able to use the existing structure of NPIP and can help build that in your own state or access it from your state.
Yeah, so you're right. The legislation that we have does permit us to expand to other states. We're domiciled in Washington and governed by Washington regulators, things like that. So we are permitted to expand. Right now, we aren't permitted by those other states yet to expand out into that space. So those are things we're working on. Those are kind of long-range goals for the program down the road. That said, if you're interested in an alternative insurance model, what I would say is check with them on other types of creative ways. We can take states that are domiciled in nearby states that maybe are operating in Washington solely or as a component of their divisions, depending on operation. So I'd still ask those questions if you're interested in a risk model near you, or if you're, in the Pacific Northwest and you're interested in MPIP, those are things that are worth considering. And just, ask your broker those questions, reach out to our team directly. We can help with some of that. But yeah, great question. It's a someday goal for us.
Right. Thank you so much.
Glad you asked that, Robin. I know that was on everybody's mind. And thanks again to everybody. We're at time. So just wishing you all a very happy holiday season. And we hope to see you at one of our conferences soon. National RTAP is having our Technical Assistance Conference, December 2023 in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So I hope to see everybody there. Bye.
Super. Thanks, Kara.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.